Hi, it's Sarah from Waves and Wild here, and welcome to this video on pockets. In this video, I'm going to talk you through how to add inseam pockets to a pattern that doesn't currently have them. You probably know by now that I'm a big fan of pockets, and most of my patterns include pockets, but if you have one that doesn't and you want to add them, it's really simple, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So the pattern that I'm working with here as an example is the Hang 10 Boardies pattern. This does have an option for a patch pocket, so a pocket that you apply on the outside as a patch, but it doesn't have the option for inseam pockets. And so I'm going to show you how to do that today, and it's really simple. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to create a pocket pattern piece, and it needs to look something like this. Okay, now you need to make sure that it's big enough for your hand and to make sure it's practical. So you want to put your hand down on a piece of paper, and you want to make sure that your pocket is a bit larger than your hand, because you don't want your hand to be squished in it. And then on top of that, you need to remember your seam allowance. So if you're working with a pattern with a 10mm seam allowance, whatever you think your pocket should be, you add on another 10mm 3/8 of an inch on top of that. Obviously different seam allowances, you just add on different amounts. And you want it to be something like this shape. This is just a sort of curved shape, but if you think about when you put your hands into a pocket, you tend to angle them downwards rather than have a pocket sticking straight out from the side seam sort of towards your middle. Your hands will angle downwards. So that's why it has this downwards facing curve on it. This blue section here, this is my seam allowance that I will attach it to the side seam on my pattern. So the pattern that I'm using is using a 3/8 of an inch 10mm seam allowance. So that's what this blue rectangle here is. I just need to pause the video here to say that I am in fact wrong. The seam allowance of the Hang 10 Boardies is 1/4 inch or 6mm. I think perhaps my coffee levels were not high enough when I originally filmed this. But it doesn't actually make any difference to the rest of the tutorial. Whatever the seam allowance of your main pattern is, whether that's 6mm or whether it's 10mm or 1/2 inch, that's the seam allowance you use when creating your inseam pockets. So it doesn't matter what your seam allowance is, you just use that seam allowance throughout. However, if you happen to be making Hang 10 Boardies, please use a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, back to the rest of the video. So you just need to make sure you include that as well, because that's how you're going to attach it to the side of your garment. So you need to make sure that it's a good size, that it's going to be a comfortable pocket to use. If you're doing a woven pattern, you want to perhaps be a little extra generous. If it's a knit pattern, it's a little bit more flexible about the sizing. So this would be a pattern that I would use if I were doing a pocket for myself. I'm going to sew up a test garment for you in Charlie size, just because it's easier to get on the camera and still show you all the details without having to zoom out too far. But you can see it's the same idea. It's a downwards facing curve, and I've made sure to include my seam allowance here. And I have checked with Charlie's hand that it fits comfortably in with the seam allowance around the outside as well. So once you've created your pattern piece, you need to go ahead and you need to cut out 2 pocket pieces for each pocket. So these are going to be sewn together eventually in pairs to create your pocket. So you need to have 4 pocket pieces for your garment. The next thing you need to do is figure out where on your garment you're going to put your pockets, because obviously you don't have pocket markers on there because this is a pattern that doesn't have pockets and you're adding your own. If you've already previously sewn up this garment, you could put it on and mark whilst it's being worn where would be comfortable to put pockets. That's probably the easiest way to do it. However, if you've not sewn it up, then it's still really easy to do. I want to make sure that my pockets go far enough down that they don't get caught up in the waistband, but not so far down that they feel uncomfortable or unnatural to put my hands into, and definitely not so far down that they're getting anywhere near the bottom hem. So I need to consider the waistband of my pattern. This pattern has a really simple waistband. You just fold it down once and you fold it down a second time, and then you create an elastic casing for your waist elastic. So what I'm going to do is, even though I haven't even started sewing my garment, is I'm going to go and I'm going to press my the top of this pattern as if I were creating my waist casing now. And then I will be able to really clearly see where the waistband is going to go, so that I know where I can put my pockets so that they will be comfortable, but they won't get in the way of that waistband. So I've now folded down the top of each of my back pattern pieces. And just a quick note while we're here actually, if I were making a garment actually to keep and to wear, I wouldn't have written quite so visibly which side is the right side and the wrong side. If I'm using plain fabric where the right side and the wrong side are really similar, I do always mark one side of my fabric, but I would either do that with something like washi tape that I can remove and doesn't tend to mark lightweight woven fabrics like this that I would use for making shorts for Charlie, or I would mark it perhaps in a less conspicuous place in the seam allowance. But that would be really difficult for you to see. So that's why I have written quite so visibly on here, right side, so that you can see which is the right side and which is the wrong side of my fabric. So I've folded down the top of each of the pattern pieces as if I were creating the waist casing. So if I turn to the back, you can see where the waistband on this pattern ends. So I don't want my pocket to be up here where it's going to get caught up in there. That's not going to work. And I don't want to sort of put it right butt up against the waistband, because then if you go off track just by a few millimeters or so, you could end up in trouble. So I'm going to give myself, I don't know, perhaps 1.5 centimeters, 50 millimeters between the end of my waistband and where I'm going to put my pockets. So once I have decided on the location of my pockets, I just need to put a little marker on my pattern piece to show where they're going to go. I then need to transfer that marker to the other back piece and to the 2 front pieces, so that I have a marker on every single pattern piece showing exactly where my pockets are going to go. When you come to your front pieces, I haven't folded down the waistband on those, so I either need to go away and fold down the top on that so that I can line it up at the top, or I can line up from the bottom and it will give me an accurate location for my pocket placement. So I need to make sure that I've done all 4. Now it's super simple on this cheap white fabric that I'm using. This is the fabric that I use when I'm doing test garments so that I don't waste my good fabric. It's really easy to mark on this just by using this washable pen. If you're using a darker fabric, you might want to use a tailor's chalk or a chalk pencil, or you can use pins to mark your position, or if you've got a large enough seam allowance, you can do a tiny little notch into the fabric. Just take care that you don't go so far in that you might risk compromising your seam. If you make your notch too big and it ended up close to your seam allowance, you could end up with a weak spot there. So I tend to prefer to mark onto the fabric rather than cutting into the fabric. The next thing you need to do is consider whether you need to finish the raw edges of your fabric. And what I mean by that is you need to think whether you need to put a line of stitching along the cut edge to stop it fraying when the garment's being worn. If you're using a knit fabric, you probably won't need to do this because knits typically don't fray when worn, but woven fabrics, and this is a woven fabric I'm using here, they will fray when they're worn. So you need to finish the raw edge of your fabric. Now there is an opportunity to do this later on in the process, but it will involve going around very tight corners, and if you use an overlocker or a serger to finish your raw edges, that can be quite challenging. And honestly, the simplest option is to finish your raw edges now before you start constructing your pocket. So you need to take each of your garment pattern pieces, whether that's pants, shorts, skirts, whatever, and you need to finish this outside leg seam, which is the place where you put your pocket markers on already. So this outside edge here needs to be finished using an overlock or a serger, or if you don't have one, you can use an overlock stitch or a zigzag stitch on a regular sewing machine. Once you've done that, just make sure you can still see your pocket markers. If they're a little bit unclear, just go ahead and mark them again. Mine's really easy because I used a bright blue on a white fabric, but if you've done a more subtle marking, then you might need to just go over and make sure that they're really clear. You then need to do the same with your pocket pieces, and you need to finish the entire outside edge. So go around the entire outside with your overlock or serger, or a zigzag overlock stitch on your regular sewing machine. And you need to do that for all 4 pocket pieces and all 4 garment pieces. Once you've done that, you will start to apply your pockets to your main garment. You need to do this right sides together. So again, I've been really helpful, written right side on each side of my pocket. And here you can see this is the right side of my garment fabric. So you line up the outside straight edge with the outside edge of your garment, making sure that the top of your pocket matches the top of your pocket markers and the bottom of your pocket matches your bottom pocket marker. You then just need to pin it in place. And there they are. They are right sides facing. The right sides of your fabric are touching. And you need to go ahead and do that with all 4 pockets and all 4 garment pieces. So now I have my 4 garment pieces with my 4 pockets all pinned on right sides facing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew between my 2 pocket markers along the edge of this pocket here using a 10mm 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, because that's the seam allowance for this garment. So I will start here, sew along and stop here. So I now have 4 garment pieces and I have sewn my 4 pocket pieces to them. I have used a bright red thread here. I would absolutely use a colour matched thread when sewing pockets like these, but I wanted to make it clear so that you could see really easily where the line of stitching is. So you can see here I've sewn my 4 pocket pieces to my 4 garment pieces. The next thing I need to do is I'm going to open each of these up and press them open. Okay, this is because we are going to understitch next, and this will help the pockets stay inside when they're being worn rather than rolling to the outside. So I'm going to press it open and then I will show you where to stitch for understitching. So you need to do that on all 4 of your garment and pocket pieces. Now open it up and press them really well. So here I've taken my main garment pieces and I've unfolded the pocket and I've pressed it open. The next thing you need to do is stitch along here on the pocket side of the seam, and you will be stitching through your pocket and the 2 layers of pocket and main garment underneath. So you'll be stitching through 3 layers. The reason for this is that it will help keep your pocket, as I said, from flipping out and rolling out and showing the inside of your pocket when the garment's being worn. So you will stitch just very close to the edge, but just on the pocket side of the folded seam. I can show you one that I've already stitched here. So I've stitched it really close to the folded edge, and it's just going to keep that pocket bag in place when it's being worn. So you need to do that to all 4 of your pocket pieces. Once you have understitched all 4 of your pocket pieces, you need to go ahead with the regular instructions for your pattern until it comes to the point where you need to sew the outer leg seam. So with the hang 10 pattern, which I am using here, it instructs you to do the crotch seam first before doing your outer leg seam. So that's what I've done here. Other shorts and pants patterns may have you doing the inside and outside leg seams before the crotch. There's 2 different ways to construct them. And obviously if you're doing a skirt pattern, you don't have to deal with the crotch seam at all, although there may be a center front seam on some patterns. But anyway, continue with the instructions for whichever pattern you're doing until it gets to the point where you need to sew your outer leg seams. So for this pattern, I have to place my front and my back of my shorts together. And the instructions tell me to sort of sew straight down my outer leg seam. Now, obviously I'm not going to do that because that would sew my pockets shut. So what you do at this point is you're going to line up your two pockets really carefully and pin them in place. And then you will sew along here, but instead of going straight down, you'll go out, around, and go around your pocket and then finish off your leg seam there. So you can see now why I said it was much easier to finish all your fabrics before starting to sew your pocket. You could go and sew just these layers with your overlocker and then go construct your garment by going down, around, and down again with your overlocker or your serger. But these corners here, they're going to be really tricky, and it's so much easier to finish off your raw edges earlier. So that's why I recommended that you do that. So you need to pin your outside legs and going down, around, and down again. And you need to do that to both sides. So I would also line up the other side of my garment and do the second side here. It's worth mentioning, just because it comes up in a lot of patterns, that if, for example, you're sewing shorts or pants, your pattern typically won't lie flat at this point. That's because most people have a larger back than they do have a front when making shorts and trousers. So they won't lie flat, but they should line up perfectly along the two outer leg seams. So you need to go away now and pin and sew your outer leg seam. So we now have pockets. I've sewn that outer leg seam. I just used my sewing machine because, like I said, those corners on an overlocker or a serger were going to be too tricky. So I sewed down, around and down again using my straight stitch on my sewing machine. And I've also sewn the inside leg seam just so that they look a bit more like shorts for you and you can visualize how the finished garment would look. Now, this is awful cheap fabric that desperately needs another press, but you get the idea. I've now got some pockets ready for Charlie to fill, if he was wearing these, with stones and Pokemon cards and all the other things that 7-year-olds need to put in their pockets. You can see if I open up the pocket, that understitching there that we did, that's going to keep the pockets nice and neat. But when it's pressed and lying properly, you wouldn't be able to see the inside of those pockets at all. They'd be completely hidden and look really smart. So there we go. That's how to add simple inseam pockets to shorts, pants, skirts, dresses, whatever it is that you want to add pockets to. If this was a real garment that I was going to finish, all I would need to do now is follow my regular pattern instructions to do my waistband and my hems, and then I would have a finished pair of shorts with pockets. So I hope that's been helpful and that you can now add pockets to just about everything.